Tonight, I'm going to tell you about a woman who discovered her husband's infidelity not through text messages or lipstick on his collar, but through a champagne bill hidden in his jacket pocket. 23 years of marriage shattered in a second. But instead of crying, she quietly plotted to destroy the most powerful man on Wall Street. This is a story of perfect revenge. Stay tuned, hit like, and comment the name of the city you're watching in so I know where this story left off. Now, let's begin. The receipt felt like paper made of ice. Selene Voss stood in the dim hallway of her Ashford Lane mansion, her fingers gripping a thin slip of thermal paper that had fallen from the pocket of her husband's coat. October wind rattled the windows behind her. The grandfather clock in the foyer ticked somewhere to her left, each second a small detonation in the silence. She read the words again. Chateau Margaux, 1995. 2 bottles, $8,400. And beneath Adrian's looping signature, another name in slanted cursive, Ivy Laurent. Not a business associate, not a client, a woman. Celine's throat tightened, but no sound came out. Her breath hung in front of her like smoke, though the house was warm. She'd been married 23 years. 23 years of waking beside the same man, learning the rhythm of his breathing, memorizing the way he folded his newspaper at breakfast. 23 years of standing beside him at galas and board meetings, smiling when expected, silent when required. And now this. She pressed the receipt flat against the marble console table, smoothing the crinkled edges with trembling hands. The hall mirror reflected her back, a woman in her late 40s, dark hair pulled into a low bun, wearing cashmere and pearls like armor. Her mother's diamond earrings caught the light. She looked composed, elegant, exactly the way Adrian preferred her. Inside, something cracked. She folded the receipt once, twice, and slipped it into the pocket of her cardigan. Then she walked down the hallway toward the kitchen, her heels clicking against marble like a countdown. Adrian sat at the breakfast table, scrolling through his phone with one hand while holding a coffee mug in the other. He didn't look up when she entered. His suit jacket hung over the back of his chair, charcoal wool perfectly tailored. His hair, still thick at 51, was combed back with the kind of precision that required effort to appear effortless. "Morning," he said, eyes still on his screen. Selene poured herself coffee from the French press. Her hand didn't shake. Years of practice had taught her how to control the small things. The tremor in her fingers, the hitch in her breath, the urge to scream. "Morning," she said. Adrian glanced up briefly, then back down. "I have the Vandenberg meeting at 9. Dinner tonight's at Lexington Club with the board. You're expected." "Of course." She sat across from him and took a sip of coffee. It burned her tongue, but she didn't flinch. She watched him over the rim of her cup, the way his jaw worked when he chewed, the slight furrow in his brow when he read something irritating, the unconscious tap of his index finger against the table. 23 years, and she could still read him like a balance sheet. But could he read her? "You're quiet this morning," Adrian said, not looking up. "Am I?" "More than usual." He set his phone down and finally met her eyes. His gaze was sharp, clinical, the same look he gave junior analysts before firing them. "Something wrong?" Selene smiled. It was the smile she'd perfected over 2 decades of charity events and business dinners. Warm, unassuming, just bright enough to deflect scrutiny. "Just tired," she said. "Didn't sleep well." Adrian nodded, satisfied, and picked up his phone again. "Take a nap this afternoon. You look pale." He stood, drained the rest of his coffee, and grabbed his jacket. Selene watched him button it, adjust his cuffs, check his reflection in the hallway mirror. Every movement was practiced, controlled. He was a man who had built an empire on precision. At the door, he paused. "By the way, the Blackthorn Gala is in 3 weeks. I picked out a gown for you. It's hanging in your closet." "Thank you." "Emerald green. It'll photograph well." He left without kissing her goodbye. The door clicked shut. The house fell silent again, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic beyond the gates. Selene sat alone at the breakfast table, staring at the empty chair across from her. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the receipt, unfolding it slowly. Ivy Laurent. She memorized the name, rolling it over in her mind like a stone in her mouth. Then she stood, walked to her study, and locked the door behind her. The room was hers, the only space in the house Adrian never entered. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with first editions and financial journals. Her mother's old oak desk sat in the center, scarred and solid, the only furniture she'd brought with her when she married. It smelled faintly of lemon oil and old paper. Selene sat down and opened her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before she typed, Ivy Laurent, New York. The search results loaded slowly, each link a small revelation. Ivy Laurent, Executive Director, Mercer Global Holdings. She clicked the first link. A professional headshot appeared. A woman in her late 20s with blonde hair, sharp cheekbones, and the kind of polished beauty that came from money and good lighting. Her LinkedIn profile listed an MBA from Wharton, 3 years at Goldman Sachs, and a recent promotion to Adrian's firm. Selene leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking beneath her. She felt something cold settle in her chest. Not rage, not heartbreak, but something quieter and more dangerous. Clarity. She opened a new tab and searched for the restaurant listed on the receipt. La Maison Bleue, a private dining club in Tribeca with no public menu and a 6-month wait list. The kind of place where people went to be invisible. Another tab, another search. Adrian Mercer travel schedule. His calendar synced to her phone, a small courtesy from the early years of their marriage when she'd managed his appointments. He'd never revoked her access. She scrolled through the past 6 months, matching dates to credit card statements she'd quietly downloaded from their shared accounts. October 14th, dinner at La Maison Bleue, $8,400. September 22nd, hotel suite at the Marlowe, $3,200. August 10th, private jet to Martha's Vineyard, $47,000. The pattern emerged like a photograph developing in a darkroom. Every expense carefully hidden beneath corporate accounts. Every receipt filed under client entertainment. Every lie wrapped in the language of business. Selene's hands were steady now. She clicked through files, cross-referenced dates, opened spreadsheets her mother had taught her to read when she was 16 years old. Her mother, who'd survived her own husband's betrayal by learning to follow the money. Her mother, who died 5 years ago, holding Selene's hand and whispering, "Never let a man make you small." By noon, Selene had mapped out 6 months of infidelity. By 2 o'clock, she'd found something worse. The numbers didn't add up. Mercer Global Holdings reported quarterly earnings of $340 million. But the internal accounts, the ones Adrian thought she'd never access, showed losses of nearly $80 million. Money moving through offshore accounts in Zurich, funneled into shell companies with names like Crescent Capital Partners and Helios Strategic Fund. Selene's pulse quickened. She opened another file, then another, following the thread deeper. Adrian wasn't just cheating on her. He was stealing from his own investors, hiding losses, falsifying reports, and Ivy Laurent's signature appeared on half the documents. Selene sat back, her breath coming faster now. The affair was one thing, but fraud on this scale, this was federal prison. This was the end of everything Adrian had built, and he thought she didn't know. She closed the laptop and walked to the window. Outside, the October sky had darkened to slate gray. Rain began to fall, streaking the glass in thin rivulets. She pressed her palm against the cold pane and stared at her reflection. For years, she'd been the perfect wife. The woman who smiled at the right moments, who laughed at Adrian's jokes, who wore the dresses he chose and attended the events he required. She'd made herself small so he could feel large. She'd folded herself into the shape he wanted until she'd almost forgotten what she looked like unfolded. But standing there, watching rain blur the city beyond the gates, Selene realized something she should have understood years ago. Adrian had already decided to leave her. The affair wasn't a mistake, it was a plan. He was building a new life with Ivy while quietly dismantling their marriage, preparing to discard Selene the way he discarded junior executives who'd outlived their usefulness. He was waiting for the right moment, probably after the Blackthorn Gala, after the cameras, after he'd secured his reputation in front of 600 of the most powerful people in Manhattan. And then he would announce it. The separation, the divorce, the new beginning. Selene's reflection stared back at her, eyes dark and unblinking. Not if I destroy him first. The name came to her 3 days later, whispered over martinis at a dinner party she almost didn't attend. Selene stood near the bar at the Whitmore penthouse, surrounded by the usual crowd of Manhattan elites, investment bankers, venture capitalists, surgeons' wives who'd never worked a day in their lives. She was halfway through a conversation about interior designers when she heard it. Lucien Vale got him out of it, of course. Man's a ghost. You call him when the world's on fire and you need someone who knows how to make problems disappear. Selene turned slightly, pretending to reach for a canapé. The speaker was Thomas Whitmore, a hedge fund manager with too much cologne and a tendency to gossip after his third drink. "Who's Lucien Vale?" someone asked. Thomas leaned in conspiratorially. "No one you want to meet. But if you ever need to, and I mean really need to, you go through Marcus at Onyx Lounge. That's the only way." The conversation shifted to real estate, but Selene had already stopped listening. She finished her drink, excused herself, and left the party early. By midnight, she was standing outside Onyx Lounge, a members-only club tucked behind an unmarked limestone building in the West Village. Rain fell in cold sheets, soaking through her coat. She'd walked 12 blocks instead of calling her driver, needing the time to think. The doorman, a man built like a vault, studied her with flat eyes. "Members only," he said. "I need to speak with Marcus." "Marcus doesn't take walk-ins." Selene pulled an envelope from her purse. Inside was a check for $50,000, made out to cash. She held it up so the doorman could see the number. "Tell him Selene Voss needs 5 minutes. Tell him it's about Lucien Vale." The doorman's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. He took the envelope, disappeared inside, and returned 2 minutes later. "Third floor, last door on the left." The club was darker than Selene expected. Low lighting, leather booze, the kind of silence that felt expensive. She climbed the stairs, her heels muffled by thick carpet. At the end of the hall, a door stood slightly ajar. She knocked once. "Come in." The office was small, wood-paneled, smelling faintly of cigar smoke and old books. A man sat behind a desk, mid-50s, gray beard, wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. He looked up from a ledger and gestured to the chair across from him. "Mrs. Voss," he said. "Sit." Selene sat. Her coat dripped onto the Persian rug beneath her feet. Marcus folded his hands on the desk. "You want Lucien?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because my husband is stealing from his investors, and I want to make sure he pays for it." Marcus studied her for a long moment, his gaze sharp and evaluating. Then he opened a drawer, pulled out a business card, and slid it across the desk. The card was blank except for a phone number embossed in black ink. "Call that number. He'll decide if he wants to meet you." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Word of advice, Mrs. Voss. Lucien Vale doesn't work for free, and he doesn't do favors. Whatever you want from him, it'll cost you. Maybe money. Maybe something else. You sure you're ready for that?" Selene picked up the card, her fingers steady. Yes. She'd left the club, walked back through the rain, and sat in the back of her car with the card in her lap. The driver asked where she wanted to go. She told him to circle the block while she made a call. She dialed the number. It rang once, twice. "Selene Voss," a man's voice said. Not a question, a statement. Her breath caught. "How do you—" Marcus called ahead. "I've been waiting." The voice was low, calm, with an accent she couldn't place. "You want to talk about your husband?" "Yes." "Then we meet. Tomorrow night, 9 o'clock. There's a building on East 73rd, number 418, unmarked door, ring twice." "How do I know You don't. But you came this far, didn't you?" The line went dead. Selene sat in the dark car, rain hammering the roof, her heart pounding against her ribs. She should turn back. She should go home, pack her things, file for divorce like a reasonable person. But reasonable people didn't win against men like Adrian Mercer. And Selene Voss was done being reasonable. The building on East 73rd looked like every other brownstone on the block. Elegant, expensive, forgettable. Selene stood on the sidewalk at 8:57 p.m., her breath fogging in the cold October air. She wore black trousers, a wool coat, and her mother's diamond earrings. No jewelry, no perfume, nothing that would make her memorable to anyone watching. She climbed the steps and rang the bell twice. The door opened. A woman in her 30s stood in the doorway, dressed in a gray suit that looked more like armor than business attire. She didn't smile. "ID," she said. Selene handed over her driver's license. The woman scanned it with her phone, waited for something to ping, then stepped aside. "Third floor. He's expecting you." The interior was nothing like Selene expected. No opulence, no marble or gold, just clean white walls, hardwood floors, and the kind of silence that felt intentional. She climbed the stairs, each step echoing in the empty space. At the top, another door stood open. Selene stepped inside. The room was a study, bookshelves, a desk, two leather chairs facing each other across a low table. A single lamp cast warm light over everything, leaving the corners in shadow. And in one of the chairs sat a man who looked like he'd been waiting for her all his life. Lucian Vale was younger than she expected. Mid-40s, maybe. Dark hair graying at the temples, sharp cheekbones, eyes so pale they looked almost colorless in the dim light. He wore a black sweater and trousers, no tie, no watch. His hands were folded in his lap, and when he looked at her, Selene felt the air shift. "Sit," he said. Not unkind, just direct. She sat. Lucien watched her for a moment, his gaze steady and unreadable. Then he leaned back in his chair, his expression neither warm nor cold. "Your husband is Adrian Mercer," he said, "founder and CEO of Mercer Global Holdings. Net worth approximately $1.2 billion, though that number's been inflated for the past 18 months. You've been married 23 years, no children. You manage the household, attend charity events, and stay out of his business. Until now." Celine's throat tightened. "How do you—" "It's my job to know." Lucien tilted his head slightly. "You're here because you found out about Ivy Laurent, the affair, the champagne receipts, the hotel rooms." He paused. "And you're wondering if I can help you destroy him." Celine's pulse hammered in her ears. "Can you?" "Yes." "How?" Lucien leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Your husband isn't just cheating on you, Mrs. Voss. He's been running a Ponzi scheme disguised as high-yield investment fund for the past 3 years. He's stolen approximately $340 million from his clients, funneling it through offshore accounts and shell corporations. Ivy Laurent isn't just his mistress. She's the one signing the paperwork." Celine's breath stopped. Lucien continued, his voice calm and precise. "Adrian plans to introduce Ivy publicly at the Blackthorn Foundation Gala in 3 weeks. After that, he'll file for divorce quietly, positioning himself as the victim of an amicable separation. He'll keep his reputation, you'll keep your silence, and in 6 months, he'll marry Ivy at a private ceremony in the Hamptons." "How do you know all this?" "Because men like your husband are predictable. They think they're smarter than everyone else. They think no one's watching." Lucien's pale eyes locked onto hers. "But someone's always watching." Celine's hands gripped the armrests of her chair. "If you know all this, why haven't you done anything about it?" "Because it wasn't my business. Until now." "And if I ask you to make it your business?" Lucien smiled, a small, humorless curve of his mouth. "Then your husband's empire collapses in front of 600 people at the gala. Federal investigators receive the evidence the same night. Every bank, every investor, every political connection he has disappears before sunrise. And Adrian Mercer spends the rest of his life trying to explain how he lost everything in a single evening." Celine's heart pounded so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "What do you get out of this?" "Satisfaction, and a favor you'll owe me someday." "What kind of favor?" "The kind I'll decide when the time comes." Lucien leaned back again, his gaze never leaving hers. "But I don't deal in violence, Mrs. Voss. I deal in information. If you want your husband beaten or killed, you're in the wrong room. If you want him ruined, publicly, legally, and completely, then we can talk." Celine's throat was dry. Her hands trembled in her lap, but she forced them still. "I want him ruined," she said quietly. Lucien nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. "Then starting tomorrow, you go back to being the perfect wife. You smile at his jokes, you attend his dinners, you wear the emerald gown he picked out for you, and you let him believe he's already won." "For 3 weeks?" "For 3 weeks. Can you do that?" Selene thought of the receipt in her pocket, the spreadsheets on her laptop, the years of smiling when she wanted to scream. Yes, she said. Lucien stood, extending his hand. Then we have an agreement. Selene stood and shook his hand. His grip was firm, cool, steady. One more thing, Lucien said as she turned to leave. Your husband is going to sense something's changed. Men like him always do. When he starts watching you more closely, and he will, don't flinch, don't hesitate. Make him believe you're exactly who he thinks you are. Selene met his gaze. And who does he think I am? A woman who's already given up. Selene walked to the door, her pulse still racing. She paused at the threshold, looking back at the man who'd just agreed to help her destroy her husband. Why are you helping me? She asked. Lucien's expression didn't change. Because men like Adrian Mercer burn down everything they touch. And someone needs to hold the match. Selene left the brownstone and walked into the cold October night. Rain had started again, light and steady, turning the streetlights into halos of gold. She pulled her coat tighter and walked home, her mind spinning with everything Lucien had said. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of pretending, of smiling, of becoming the woman Adrian thought she was so she could destroy the man he'd become. By the time she reached the mansion on Ashford Lane, Selene Voss had made her decision. She was done being small, and Adrian Mercer had no idea what was coming. The first morning back, Selene woke at 5:30 to the sound of Adrian's alarm buzzing through the wall between their bedrooms. They'd stopped sharing a bed 2 years ago. His decision, framed as consideration for her light sleeping. She'd accepted it without protest, the way she accepted everything else. Now she understood it was preparation, clearing space for Ivy. Selene lay still beneath the duvet, listening to the creak of floorboards as Adrian moved through his morning routine. Shower, shave, the clink of his watch against the marble counter, every sound a familiar chord in a song she'd memorized without ever choosing to learn it. Her phone sat on the nightstand, screen dark. No messages from Lucien. He told her he would reach out when necessary, never before. In the meantime, she had her instructions. Be perfect. She rose, showered, and dressed in cream silk and wool, the kind of understated elegance Adrian preferred. Downstairs, she brewed coffee exactly the way he liked it, 2 sugars and a splash of cream, and set it on the breakfast table beside the folded Wall Street Journal. When Adrian walked in, still knotting his tie, he paused. You're up early, he said. Couldn't sleep. Selene poured herself coffee, her movement smooth and practiced. Thought I'd make sure you had everything before your meeting. Adrian's eyes lingered on her for a fraction too long. Not suspicious yet, just surprised. He sat down, picked up the coffee, and took a sip. Perfect, he said. Then, after a moment, you feeling all right? Fine. Why? You've been... He trailed off, searching for the word. Distant. The past few days. Selene met his gaze over the rim of her cup, her expression open and unguarded. Have I? I'm sorry. I think I've just been tired. Adrian studied her face, his jaw working slightly. Then he nodded, satisfied, and unfolded the paper. Take it easy today. Rest. I will. She watched him read, noting the way his eyes moved across the page, the slight furrow in his brow when he reached the financial section. 23 years and she could still read every micro-expression, every unconscious tell. But could he read hers? Not anymore. After Adrian left, Selene cleared the table and locked herself in her study. Her hand shook as she pulled out her laptop. Not from fear, but from the sheer effort of holding herself together. 3 weeks of this. 3 weeks of smiling while her insides turned to glass. Her phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. Check your email. Burner phone arrives tomorrow. L. Selene opened her encrypted email account, the one she'd set up after leaving Lucien's brownstone. A single message waited, no subject line, just an attachment. She downloaded it. A PDF file labeled MG Holdings, Internal Review. The document was 200 pages of financial records, wire transfers, offshore accounts, and email chains between Adrian and Ivy. Selene scrolled through it slowly, her coffee going cold beside her. Every page was another nail in Adrian's coffin, every transaction another lie. But the further she read, the worse it got. Adrian hadn't just stolen from investors. He'd used the money to fund real estate purchases under Ivy's name. A penthouse in Tribeca, a beach house in the Hamptons, a car lease for a Mercedes she'd never driven. He was building her a life brick by brick while dismantling his marriage to Selene piece by piece. Selene's vision blurred. She closed the laptop and pressed her palms against her eyes, breathing through her nose until the dizziness passed. Don't break. Not yet. The burner phone arrived the next afternoon in a plain padded envelope with no return address. Selene tucked it into her purse and drove herself to Central Park, parking near the reservoir where joggers passed in steady streams. She sat on a bench overlooking the water and powered on the phone. One saved contact, L. She typed a message. I read the file. The reply came instantly. And, how long have you been watching him? 6 months. He's not the only one I watch. Selene's pulse quickened. Are you watching me? I'm protecting you. There's a difference. She stared at the screen, her breath fogging in the cold air. Around her the city moved. Runners, tourists, a man walking 3 small dogs on tangled leashes. Normal life. The kind of life she used to have before she realized it was all scaffolding around a collapsing structure. What happens next? She typed. You attend the investor dinner Thursday night. Smile. Be seen. Ivy will be there. Selene's stomach clenched. What if I can't do this? The reply took longer this time. Then Adrian wins. And you spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you'd been brave enough to fight back. Selene deleted the thread and powered off the phone. Osak. Thursday night arrived too quickly. The investor dinner was held at Lexington Club, a members-only establishment where Manhattan's financial elite gathered to congratulate themselves over oysters and scotch. Selene had attended dozens of these events over the years, always in the background, always decorative, always silent and less spoken to. Tonight felt different. Tonight she was a spy in her own life. Adrian adjusted his cufflinks in the car on the way over, his jaw tight. Vandenberg's bringing his wife. Make sure you talk to her. She's planning some fundraiser and wants your name on the committee. Of course. And don't mention the market volatility. Everyone's on edge about the European bonds. I won't. Adrian glanced at her, his eyes sharp. You look nervous. Selene forced a smile. Do I? Your hands. You keep twisting your ring. She looked down. Her wedding band, Ris, white gold, understated, had rotated halfway around her finger. She hadn't even noticed. Just cold, she said, folding her hands in her lap. Adrian's gaze lingered, then returned to his phone. We're meeting the Vandenbergs at 7. After that, the board wants a word. All right. The car pulled up to the club's discreet entrance, flanked by gas lamps and boxwood topiaries. A valet opened Selene's door. She stepped onto the curb, her heels clicking against the pavement, and followed Adrian inside. The main dining room glowed with amber light and old money. Mahogany panels, crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths stretched across tables where men in dark suits leaned close over cigars, and women laughed at jokes that weren't funny. Selene recognized most of the faces. Investors, board members, politicians who'd traded integrity for campaign contributions. And there, near the bar, stood Ivy Laurent. Selene's breath stopped. Ivy wore navy silk, her blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon. She was younger than her photos suggested, late 20s at most, with the kind of beauty that came from good genes and expensive upkeep. She stood beside Marcus Vandenberg, laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She looked comfortable, confident, like she belonged. Adrian hadn't seen her yet. He was shaking hands with a board member, his expression warm and practiced. Selene watched Ivy glance toward Adrian, watched her smile soften into something private and knowing. That's the woman who's replacing me. Selene, Adrian's voice cut through her thoughts. Come meet Jonathan Greaves. Selene turned, smiled, extended her hand. Mr. Greaves, lovely to see you again. Mrs. Mercer, you look radiant as always. The words were automatic, meaningless, the verbal equivalent of elevator music. Selene floated through the conversation, nodding at the right moments, laughing softly when expected. But her eyes kept drifting across the room to Ivy, and then Ivy looked back. Their gazes met for a fraction of a second. Ivy's expression didn't change. Polite, distant, unreadable. Then she turned away, back to her conversation, as if Selene didn't exist. She knows who I am, And she doesn't care. Celine's pulse hammered in her throat. She excused herself and walked toward the restroom, her legs unsteady. Inside, the lounge was empty. All marble and gold fixtures, and the kind of silence that felt expensive. Selene gripped the edge of the sink and stared at her reflection. Her face looked calm, composed, exactly the mask she'd worn for 23 years. But underneath, something was breaking. The door opened. Selene looked up. Ivy Laurent stepped inside. For a moment, neither woman spoke. They stood on opposite sides of the lounge, separated by 10 feet of Italian marble and everything unspoken. Ivy broke the silence first. "Mrs. Mercer?" Her voice was softer than Selene expected, almost kind. "Miss Laurent?" Celine's voice didn't shake. Years of practice. Ivy walked to the mirror and touched up her lipstick, her movements unhurried. "I've heard a lot about you." "Have you?" "Adrian speaks very highly of you." Celine's hands tightened on the sink. "Does he?" Ivy capped her lipstick and turned, leaning against the counter. Her expression wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. "Look, I'm not here to cause drama. This doesn't have to be ugly." "Doesn't it?" "No." Ivy's gaze was steady, unflinching. "You and Adrian, you had your time. That's not a bad thing. Some marriages just run their course." Celine's vision tunneled. Run their course. "I didn't pursue him, if that's what you're thinking. It just happened. We connected. These things do. These things." Celine's voice was flat, empty. "You mean affairs?" Ivy sighed, not unkindly. "I mean relationships that develop naturally when two people realize they're better suited for each other than for the people they're currently with. And the money? The penthouse in Tribeca? The beach house? Did those develop naturally too?" Ivy's expression flickered. Just for a second. Surprise, maybe, or wariness. Then it smoothed again. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Ivy pushed off the counter, her posture shifting slightly. Less friendly now, more guarded. "I think we're done here." "We're not." Selene stepped closer, her pulse roaring in her ears. "You're signing documents, offshore accounts, shell corporations. You think I don't know? You think I'm just some decorative wife who doesn't understand numbers?" Ivy's jaw tightened. "Be careful, Mrs. Mercer." "Or what? You'll tell Adrian? Go ahead. Tell him his wife found out about the fraud. See how that goes." Ivy's eyes went cold. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Celine's voice dropped to a whisper. "You're not his partner, Ivy. You're his accomplice. And when this falls apart, and it will, you're going down with him." Ivy's hand shot out, gripping Celine's wrist hard enough to hurt. Her voice was low, venomous. "You don't know anything. You're a lonely, bitter woman who can't accept that your husband doesn't love you anymore. That's all this is." Selene wrenched her arm free. "Get out." Ivy stared at her for a long moment, her chest rising and falling quickly. Then she turned and walked out, the door swinging shut behind her with a soft click. Selene stood alone in the lounge, her reflection staring back from a dozen mirrors. Her wrist throbbed where Ivy had grabbed it. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline flooding her system. What did I just do? She pulled out the burner phone and typed, "I confronted Ivy." Lucien's reply came immediately. "Why?" "She cornered me. I couldn't." "Did Adrian see?" "No." "Then leave. Now. Don't let anyone see you leave together." Selene deleted the thread and tucked the phone away. She waited 5 minutes, fixed her hair, reapplied lipstick with trembling hands. Then she walked back into the dining room. Adrian stood near the bar, deep in conversation with 2 board members. He didn't look up when she approached. "I'm not feeling well," Selene said quietly. "I'm going to head home." Adrian frowned. "Now? We haven't even had dinner." "I have a headache. I'll take a car." "Selene, I'll be fine." She kissed his cheek, her lips brushing stubble. "Don't leave early on my account." She walked out before he could protest, through the lobby and into the cold October night. The valet brought her car. She climbed in, started the engine, and pulled into traffic. Her phone buzzed. "The burner." "You made a mistake. She'll tell him." Selene typed back. "Then what do we do?" We accelerate. No more waiting. The gala happens in 2 weeks and we move everything up. Can you handle that? Celine's hands gripped the steering wheel. The city blurred past her windows, lights streaking like falling stars. Yes. Ivy told Adrian that same night. Selene knew because Adrian came home 3 hours later, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. She heard him pause outside her bedroom door. She lay still beneath the covers, her eyes closed, her breathing slow and even. The door didn't open, but she felt him standing there, listening. After a long moment, he walked away. The next morning, everything changed. Adrian was already in the kitchen when Selene came downstairs. He sat at the table with coffee and his laptop, his expression unreadable. When she entered, he looked up. "Sit down." Not a request, a command. Selene's pulse kicked. She poured coffee and sat across from him, her hands wrapped around the mug for warmth. Adrian closed his laptop. "Ivy said you confronted her last night." "She cornered me in the restroom." "That's not what she said." "Then she lied." Adrian's jaw worked. "What's going on with you?" "Nothing." "Bullshit." He leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "You've been acting strange for days. Quiet, distracted. And now you're accusing my executive director of what, exactly?" Selene met his gaze. "I'm not accusing anyone of anything." "Then why did you tell her she's going down with me when everything falls apart?" "I didn't." "Don't lie to me." Adrian's voice was low, dangerous. "Ivy told me everything. You accused her of fraud. You told her she's my accomplice. What the hell were you thinking?" Selene's mind raced. "Stay calm. Don't flinch." "I've been going through our finances," she said carefully. "There are discrepancies, large ones. Money moving through accounts I don't recognize. I wanted to understand." "You wanted to understand?" Adrian's voice rose. "You went through my business accounts?" "Our accounts." "My business accounts, Selene. You have no right." "I have every right. We're married. What's yours is mine." Adrian stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You don't know what you're talking about. Those are investment vehicles, legal structures, things you wouldn't understand even if I explained them to you." "Try me." "No." Adrian's voice was flat, final. "You're going to drop this. Whatever you think you found, you didn't. And you're not going to embarrass me by repeating conspiracy theories to my staff." Selene stood too, her pulse roaring. "Is that what Ivy is now? Staff?" Adrian's eyes went cold. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You tell me." For a moment, they stood across the table from each other, the air between them sharp enough to cut. Adrian's hands curled into fists at his sides. Selene's breath came fast and shallow. "I'm not having this conversation," Adrian said finally. "You're upset. You're not thinking clearly. Take a few days, rest. We'll talk when you're calmer." He grabbed his coat and walked out. Selene stood alone in the kitchen, her legs trembling. She sat down hard, her coffee sloshing onto the table. Her hands shook so badly she had to clasp them together. The burner phone buzzed in her pocket. "He knows something's wrong. Be ready." El imtatun. Kimmat. The next week passed in a fog of controlled chaos. Adrian watched her constantly now, during breakfast, at dinner, across the living room when he thought she wasn't looking. His kisses became tests, his questions probes. He was hunting for the crack in her armor, the moment she'd slip. Selene gave him nothing. She smiled, she laughed. She wore the dresses he liked and attended the events he required. At night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, counting her heartbeats until dawn. Lucien sent instructions through the burner phone. Copy his calendar. Photograph any documents left in his study. Note when he takes calls in private. Selene became a ghost in her own home, invisible and everywhere at once. She memorized Adrian's passwords by watching his fingers on his phone. She photographed credit card statements when he left his wallet on the counter. She recorded a conversation between Adrian and Ivy using the voice memo app on the burner phone, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. And slowly, piece by piece, Lucien assembled the full picture of Adrian's empire. 10 days before the gala, Lucien called her to the brownstone. Selene sat across from him in the same chair as before, exhaustion carved into every line of her face. She hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night in a week. Her hands trembled constantly now, a fine vibration she couldn't control. Lucienne studied her with those pale, unreadable eyes. You look like hell. Thank you. I'm serious. When's the last time you ate? This morning. Liar. Celine's jaw tightened. What do you want, Lucienne? He slid a folder across the table. Everything we need. Wire transfers, offshore accounts, emails, recorded calls. Enough to put Adrian in federal prison for 15 years. Selene opened the folder with numb fingers. Page after page of evidence, meticulously organized and annotated. Her husband's entire criminal enterprise laid bare. The gala is in 10 days, Lucian continued. That night, at exactly 9:21 p.m., this goes to the SEC, the FBI, and 6 major news outlets simultaneously. Adrian will be on stage giving his speech when the first alerts hit. By 9:30, his bank accounts will be frozen. By 10 o'clock, investors will be demanding answers. By morning, Mercer Global Holdings will be in federal receivership. Celine's hands trembled as she turned pages. And Ivy? She gets immunity if she cooperates. She's already been talking to prosecutors through a back channel I arranged. Selene looked up sharply. What? Ivy's not stupid. She knows Adrian's going down and she doesn't want to go with him. She's been feeding us information for the past week. But she... Celine's voice caught. She confronted me. She grabbed my wrist. She panicked. You scared her, but the next day she called the number I gave her 6 months ago. Lucian leaned back, his expression neutral. Ivy Laurent is a lot of things, Selene, but she's not loyal. Not to Adrian. Not when her freedom's at stake. Celine's vision swam. Did you plan this? All of it? I planned to gather evidence. Ivy chose to save herself. You chose to fight back. Adrian chose to be a criminal. Lucien's voice softened slightly. Everyone makes choices. Now we see who lives with the consequences. Selene closed the folder, her chest tight. What happens to me? After the gala? You walk away, clean, free, with enough money from the divorce settlement to live comfortably for the rest of your life. And Adrian? Adrian loses everything. Selene sat back, the weight of it pressing down on her like gravity. 10 days. In 10 days, her husband's empire would collapse. Her marriage would end. 23 years of her life would dissolve in front of 600 people, and she would finally be free. One more thing, Lucian said. The night of the gala, you're coming as my guest. Not Adrian's wife. Mine. Celine's heart stopped. What? Adrian needs to see you walk in with me. That's when he'll understand. Lucienne's pale eyes held hers. That's when he'll know you orchestrated everything. He'll kill me. No, he won't. There will be 300 witnesses and federal agents in the building. He won't even be able to get close. Celine's hands shook. I can't. Yes, you can. Lucienne leaned forward. This is the moment, Selene. The point of no return. After this, there's no going back. No reconciliation. No forgiveness. You destroy him, or you walk away right now and let him win. Selene closed her eyes. Behind her lids, she saw Adrian's face. The way he looked at Ivy, the way he used to look at her, the way he'd stopped seeing her years ago. She saw the receipt with Ivy's name, the offshore accounts, the lies, the years of making herself small so he could feel large. She opened her eyes. I'll be ready, boss. The night before the gala, Adrian came to her room. Selene was standing by the window, staring out at the city lights, when she heard the door open. She turned. Adrian stood in the doorway, still dressed in his work clothes, his tie loosened. Can I come in? He asked. It's your house. He stepped inside and closed the door. For a moment they stood in silence, the air between them thick with everything unspoken. I've been thinking, Adrian said finally. About us. Selene's pulse quickened. Have you? Things have been strained between us. I know that. He walked closer, stopping a few feet away. I think maybe we need to talk, after the gala, about what we want. What comes next? Selene's throat tightened. He's going to ask for a divorce. All right, she said. Adrian studied her face, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body. He reached up and touched her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin. I don't want to lose you. he said quietly. Celine's breath stopped. The words hung in the air between them, and for one horrible moment, she believed him. Then she remembered Ivy's name on the receipt, the penthouse in Tribeca. The years of lies. Then don't, she whispered. Adrian leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't gentle, it was testing, searching, demanding. His hands cupped her face, his body pressing against hers. Celine's mind screamed at her to pull away, but her body responded instinctively, muscle memory from 23 years of marriage. When he finally pulled back, his eyes searched hers. Tomorrow night, the gala. We'll start over after that, I promise. Selene nodded, her lips numb. Adrian kissed her forehead and left, closing the door softly behind him. Selene stood alone in the dark, her heart hammering against her ribs. She walked to the bathroom on shaking legs and gripped the edge of the sink, staring at her reflection. Her lipstick was smudged, her eyes were too bright. She looked like a woman who'd just been kissed by her husband, but all she felt was the weight of the burner phone in her pocket, and the knowledge that in less than 24 hours, the man who'd just kissed her would realize she'd destroyed him. Selene turned on the faucet and washed her face with cold water, scrubbing until her skin was raw. Tomorrow, everything would burn, and she would be the one holding the match. The morning of the gala arrived with brutal clarity. Selene woke at dawn to find Adrian already gone, a note left on the kitchen counter in his angular handwriting. Meeting with the board. See you tonight. Wear the emerald dress. She stood in the empty kitchen holding the note, her hands steady for the first time in weeks. The fear had burned itself out somewhere in the night, replaced by something colder and harder. She felt like a wire pulled so tight it had stopped vibrating. At 10 o'clock, a package arrived. Inside was a garment bag containing the emerald gown Adrian had chosen. Silk, the color of old money, cut to skim her body like water. Beside it, a smaller box held her mother's diamond earrings, the ones she'd thought were still in her jewelry box upstairs. A card tucked inside read, "Wear these, trust me." L. Selene held the earrings up to the light, watching them fracture the morning sun into 1,000 pieces. Her mother had worn them to her own divorce hearing 40 years ago. Family legacy, passed down through women who'd survived men who tried to break them. She set them on the counter and went upstairs to shower. The day passed in slow motion. Selene moved through the house like a sleepwalker, packing essentials into a suitcase she hid in the back of her closet. Passports, bank cards, the burner phone. Documents Lucien had given her weeks ago, copies of everything they'd gathered, insurance in case something went wrong. At 4 o'clock, she started getting ready. The emerald dress fit perfectly, tailored to measurements Adrian had memorized years ago. Selene stood in front of the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. She looked powerful, dangerous, nothing like the decorative wife who'd floated through 2 decades of dinner parties. Her phone buzzed. The burner. "Car will pick you up at 8:15. Don't let Adrian see you leave." Selene typed back, "What if he's still here? He won't be. He has a meeting with Ivy at 7 o'clock. They're arriving together." Her stomach clenched. Together? It's theater. One last performance before everything burns. Stay focused. Selene deleted the thread and powered off the phone. At 7:30, she heard Adrian's car pull into the driveway. Footsteps in the foyer, the sound of him taking the stairs 2 at a time. He appeared in her doorway, already dressed in his tuxedo, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread. "You're not ready?" he said. "I'm going separately. I have a headache. I'll meet you there." Adrian frowned. "Selene, I'll be there by 9. I promise." She turned to face him, and whatever he saw in her expression made him pause. "Go. You'll be late for your meeting." He studied her for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he nodded. 9 o'clock. Don't be late." "I won't." He left. The front door slammed. His engine roared to life and faded into the distance. Selene stood in the silence, her pulse hammering. She had 45 minutes. She finished her makeup with shaking hands. Minimal, elegant, nothing that would smear, pinned her hair into a low chignon, fastened her mother's earrings, slipped into heels that made her 3 inches taller. At 8:14, headlights swept across the bedroom window. Selene grabbed her clutch, took one last look at the bedroom she'd slept in for 23 years, and walked out. The car waiting at the curb was a black sedan with tinted windows. The driver, A woman in her 30s with a scar across her left eyebrow didn't speak. She simply opened the door. Selene climbed in. Lucien sat in the back seat, dressed in a black tuxedo that made him look like a shadow given human form. His pale eyes tracked her as she settled beside him. "You look ready," he said. "I am." The car pulled into traffic. Manhattan glowed around them, all glass and light, and the hum of 8 million lives intersecting. Selene watched the city blur past, her hands folded in her lap. "Adrian and Ivy arrived 10 minutes ago," Lucien said quietly. "They're in the green room. He's introducing her to the board before his speech." "And the evidence?" "Ready to deploy at 9:21. SEC, FBI, and 6 news outlets, just like we planned." Lucien paused. "Are you sure you want to be in the room when it happens?" Selene turned to look at him. "Yes." "He's going to know it was you." "Good." Lucien's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe. Or concern. "Once we walk through those doors, there's no turning back. You understand that?" "I've understood that for weeks." The car turned onto Fifth Avenue, joining the line of limousines and town cars snaking toward the Blackthorn Foundation Gala. Ahead, the museum glowed like a jewel box, light spilling from every window. Cameras flashed on the red carpet. Guests in tuxedos and gowns climbed the marble steps beneath a banner that read, "An Evening of Excellence." Selene's stomach twisted. Somewhere inside that building, Adrian was smiling for cameras, Ivy at his side, preparing to announce a future he thought he'd already secured. The car stopped at the entrance. A valet opened Selene's door. She stepped out into the October night. The cold hit her first, sharp and clean. Then the noise. Voices, laughter, the click of heels on marble. Photographers shouted names. Security guards checked invitations. Selene felt 100 eyes turn toward her, recognition rippling through the crowd like a current. "That's Adrian Mercer's wife. Why isn't she with him? Who's that man beside her?" Lucien appeared at her elbow, offering his arm. "Ready?" Selene took it. "Yes." They climbed the steps together. The museum's grand hall opened before them like a cathedral of wealth. Soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, marble columns. 600 guests filled the space, Manhattan's elite in their finest, champagne glasses glinting like stars. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played Vivaldi near the entrance. And across the room, near the stage, Adrian Mercer stood in a circle of board members, Ivy Laurent at his side. Selene saw him see her. She watched his expression shift. Confusion first, then recognition, then something darker. His eyes moved from Selene to Lucien and back again. His hand tightened on the champagne flute he was holding. Ivy followed his gaze, her face going pale. The room began to notice. Conversations died in waves. Heads turned. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Is that Selene Mercer with Lucien Vale? What's going on? Where's Adrian?" Selene kept walking, Lucien's arm steady beneath her hand. They moved through the crowd like they owned it, past investors and politicians, and people who'd smiled at Selene for years without ever really seeing her. Adrian started toward them, his face locked in a rictus of control. But before he could reach them, a board member grabbed his arm, leaning close to whisper something urgent. Adrian's jaw clenched. He looked at Selene one more time, his eyes promising consequences, then turned back to the board member. "He's trapped," Lucien murmured. "He can't make a scene, not yet." Selene's pulse roared in her ears. "How long?" 12 minutes until his speech, 14 until everything hits. They found seats near the back, where they could see the entire room. Selene sat with her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap, every inch the elegant society wife she'd pretended to be for 2 decades. But inside, her heart was a war drum. At 9:15, the lights dimmed. A man in a tuxedo took the stage. The foundation's president, someone Selene had met dozens of times and couldn't remember. He spoke about philanthropy and excellence and the importance of giving back. Selene didn't hear a word. She watched Adrian at the side of the stage, adjusting his cufflinks, preparing to walk into the spotlight. Ivy stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. At 9:19, the president finished. "And now, please welcome Adrian Mercer, CEO of Mercer Global Holdings and this year's Philanthropist of the Year." Applause erupted. Adrian climbed the steps to the stage, his smile perfect, his posture commanding. The spotlight found him, and for a moment he looked like exactly what he'd always wanted to be: untouchable, powerful, immortal. He began to speak. Thank you all for being here tonight. For 25 years, I've had the privilege of working with the brightest minds in finance, and I've learned that true success isn't measured in profits, but in the lives we touch. Celine's phone vibrated in her clutch. She pulled it out. A text from Lucien's burner. 2 minutes. She looked at Lucy. Yen. He nodded once, his expression unreadable. On stage, Adrian continued, his voice warm and confident. Which is why I'm proud to announce a new initiative at Mercer Global Holdings, one that will... 9:21. Selene watched as phones began to light up across the ballroom. First 1, then 10, then 100. People glanced down, frowned, pulled out devices. The whispers started, low at first, then growing. Adrian faltered mid-sentence, noticing the disturbance. As I was saying, a phone rang, then another. Someone stood abruptly, phone pressed to their ear, their face draining of color. Near the front, a board member stood and hurried toward the exit, already shouting into his phone. Adrian's smile faltered. Excuse me, is there... Mercer Global is under federal investigation, someone called out from the crowd. The SEC just issued a statement. The room exploded. Guests surged to their feet, phones out, voices rising. Reporters materialized from the crowd, cameras flashing. The foundation president rushed onto the stage, trying to regain control. Adrian stood frozen in the spotlight, his face a mask of confusion that was rapidly turning to horror. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, and Selene watched his face change as he read whatever was on the screen. The blood drained from his cheeks. His hands started shaking. He looked up, scanning the crowd, and his eyes found Selene. For 3 seconds, they stared at each other across the chaos. In Adrian's eyes, Selene saw the exact moment he understood. She saw rage, betrayal, and something that looked almost like respect. Then security surrounded him, and he disappeared into a knot of bodies and shouting voices. Lucien leaned close to Celine's ear. We need to leave, now. They stood and moved toward the exit, but the crowd had become a mob. Investors shouted questions. Reporters blocked the doors. Someone grabbed Celine's arm. A woman she vaguely recognized, panic in her eyes. Did you know about this? Did Adrian tell you anything? Selene pulled free and kept walking, Lucien clearing a path ahead of her. They made it to the foyer, then the steps, then the cold night air. The car was waiting. They climbed in. The driver pulled away as police cars began arriving, sirens wailing. Inside the car, silence. Selene sat with her hands clasped in her lap, staring at nothing. Her pulse was too fast, her breath too shallow. She felt disconnected from her body, like she was watching herself from a distance. It's done, Lucien said quietly. Yes. Adrian's lawyers are probably calling him right now. By morning, his accounts will be frozen. By tomorrow afternoon, he'll be arrested. Selene nodded, but she couldn't feel anything. The moment she'd been building toward for weeks had arrived and passed, and now there was only the strange emptiness of after. The car drove for 10 minutes in silence. Then Lucien's phone rang. He answered, his face neutral. Yes? A pause. His expression changed, something Selene couldn't read. When? Another pause. Are you certain? He hung up. Selene looked at him. What is it? Lucien's jaw was tight. That was my contact at the FBI. They just executed the warrant on Adrian's office. And? The offshore accounts, the shell companies, all of it. Lucien's pale eyes met hers. It's gone. Celine's heart stopped. What do you mean gone? I mean the money was moved this afternoon, all of it. $400 million transferred out of the Zurich accounts at 3:47 p.m. That's impossible. We've been watching. Someone tipped him off. Lucien's voice was flat, controlled, but Selene could hear the fury beneath it. Someone told Adrian we were coming, and he moved everything. Selene's vision tunneled. Who? I don't know yet. But the FBI is standing in an empty vault right now, and without that money, half our case just evaporated. But the documents, the emails, the recorded calls, Circumstantial. Adrian's lawyers will claim he was misled by subordinates. They'll blame Ivy, blame the accountants, blame anyone but him. Without the actual money, the SEC can't prove intent. Lucian leaned forward, his voice sharp. Selene? Adrian might walk. The words hit her like a physical blow. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The car suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. No, she whispered. No, we had everything. Someone betrayed us, Lucian said. And we need to find out who before Adrian uses that money to disappear. Selene's hands started shaking. All of it. The weeks of planning, the sleepless nights, the terror of pretending, the moment in the bathroom when Adrian had kissed her and she'd almost broken. All of it for nothing. Take me home, she said. Selene, take me home. Now. Lucian gave the driver the address. The car turned around, heading back toward Ashford Lane. Selene stared out the window, watching the city blur past. Inside her chest, something was fracturing. Not clean like glass, messy like bone. They pulled up to the mansion 20 minutes later. Every light was on, blazing like a beacon. Adrian's car sat in the driveway. Selene's blood turned to ice. He's here. Don't go in there, Lucian said. Selene, if he knows... But she was already opening the door, already stepping out into the cold. She walked up the steps on legs that didn't feel like hers and pushed open the front door. The house was silent. Adrian? Her voice echoed in the marble foyer. No answer. She walked through the house, checking rooms. Kitchen empty. Living room empty. His study. The door was open. Papers scattered across the desk. File cabinets standing open, drawers pulled out. Someone had gone through everything in a hurry. Selene's pulse hammered. She climbed the stairs, her heels clicking against marble. Adrian? The bedroom door was ajar. Light spilled into the hallway. Selene pushed it open. Adrian sat on the edge of their bed. His bed now, she supposed. Still wearing his tuxedo, his bow tie undone and hanging loose. He held a glass of scotch in one hand. When he looked up at her, his eyes were red-rimmed but dry. There she is, he said softly. My wife. Selene's throat closed. Adrian, don't. He held up a hand. Don't say anything. Not yet. He took a drink, his hand steady. I want to ask you something first, and I want you to answer honestly. All right. Did you really think I wouldn't know? Selene's breath stopped. Adrian stood, setting down his glass. Did you really think I was that stupid? That I wouldn't notice you going through my files? That I wouldn't see the way you looked at me for the past 3 weeks, like you were memorizing my face for a trial? He walked toward her, and Selene had to force herself not to back away. I've known since the night you confronted Ivy, Adrian continued, his voice eerily calm. I've known you were planning something, and I've been watching you, Selene. Every move, every breath, wondering when you'd finally pull the trigger. The money, Selene whispered. You moved it. Of course I moved it. Adrian smiled, and it was the coldest thing Selene had ever seen. You think I built an empire by being careless? The moment I suspected you'd gone to Lucian Vale, I started preparing, moving assets, creating exit strategies, making sure that when you tried to destroy me, I'd have the resources to survive. Selene's legs felt weak. How did you know about Lucian? Because I pay people to tell me things, people in his organization, people who take my money and feed me information. Adrian tilted his head. Did you really think Lucian Vale was your friend, Selene? Did you think he cared about you? He helped me. He used you, Adrian interrupted. Lucian Vale doesn't help people. He collects favors. And now you owe him one, don't you? A debt you'll spend the rest of your life paying off. Selene's vision swam. You're lying. Am I? Adrian walked to his nightstand, opened the drawer, and pulled out a folder. He tossed it at her feet. Read it. Selene picked it up with trembling hands. Inside were photographs. Lucian meeting with Adrian's attorneys, time-stamped from 6 months ago. Documents showing payments made to shell companies Lucian controlled. Email threads discussing Selene, her movements, her plans. Her stomach turned to lead. Lucian Vale has been working for me since the beginning, Adrian said quietly. Every piece of information you gave him came straight back to me. Every plan you made, I knew about. You thought you were hunting me, Selene, but I was always 3 steps ahead. Selene dropped the folder, papers scattering at her feet. No. Yes. Adrian's voice was almost gentle now. And the beautiful thing is, you've destroyed yourself. You've embarrassed me publicly, yes, but you've also shown everyone that you're unstable, paranoid, making wild accusations against your devoted husband and his staff. My lawyers are already preparing the narrative. Selene Mercer, suffering from depression and delusions, lashing out at the man who supported her for 23 years. The evidence, Selene whispered. The SECE. Will find nothing, because there's nothing to find anymore. The accounts are empty. The money's gone. And Ivy Laurent is currently on a plane to Argentina with a new identity and enough cash to start over. Adrian smiled. She says hello, by the way. Selene's knees buckled. She caught herself against the doorframe, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Adrian watched her, his expression unreadable. I want you to understand something, Selene. I didn't plan to hurt you. I was going to let you go quietly, give you a generous settlement, let you keep your dignity. But you couldn't accept that, could you? You had to fight. You were stealing. I was doing what every smart businessman does. Moving money, managing risk. And yes, I was going to leave you for Ivy, because she understood what you never did. That power requires sacrifice. That success has a price. She's half your age. She's hungry, ambitious. She doesn't look at me like I'm a monster for wanting more than what I have. Adrian's voice hardened. You've spent 20 years trying to make me small, Selene. Comfortable. Safe. But I'm not safe. I'm a man who builds empires. And you couldn't handle that. Selene pushed off the doorframe, her legs shaking. Get out. Excuse me? Get out of this house. Now. Adrian laughed, a short, bitter sound. This is my house, Selene. My name on the deed. My money that paid for it. You're the one who's leaving. The divorce. We'll leave you with nothing. I made sure of that 2 years ago when I moved all our assets into offshore trusts you can't touch. My lawyers are very good, Selene, the best money can buy. And by the time they're done, you'll be lucky to walk away with enough to rent a studio in Queens. He walked past her, heading for the door. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. You should have stayed in your lane, he said quietly. You should have played your role and taken what I offered. Now you get to spend the rest of your life knowing you tried to destroy me and failed. That's what you've won, Selene. The knowledge that you weren't strong enough. He left. His footsteps echoed down the stairs. The front door opened and closed. Engine noise. Headlights sweeping across the bedroom wall. Then silence. Selene stood alone in the empty bedroom, paper scattered at her feet, her mother's diamond earrings catching the light. She walked to the window and looked out at the city beyond the gates. 23 years of her life. Gone. The plan she'd built with Lucien. Destroyed. Her husband. Gone. Her dignity. Shattered. And somewhere out there, Adrian Mercer was climbing into a car with $400 million and a smile on his face, knowing he'd beaten her. Selene's phone buzzed. The burner. She pulled it out with numb fingers. A text from Lucien. We need to talk. Where are you? She typed back. Did you betray me? The reply came immediately. What? No. Selene, where did you... She powered off the phone and threw it across the room. It shattered against the wall, pieces scattering across the hardwood. Then Selene Voss walked to the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the floor with her back against the tub. She pulled her knees to her chest and pressed her face against them, and for the first time in 23 years, she let herself break completely. The sound that came out of her wasn't crying. It was something deeper, more animal. The sound of a woman who'd believed she could win and discovered too late that the game was rigged from the start. She sat there until dawn, watching light creep across the marble floor, and tried to figure out how to survive the wreckage of her own life. Dawn came cold and gray, bleeding through the windows like an accusation. Selene woke on the bathroom floor, her body stiff and aching, her face pressed against tile that smelled of bleach and her own tears. For a moment, she didn't remember. Then it crashed back. Adrian's smile, the folder at her feet, Lucien's name on those payment documents, the sound of her husband's car pulling away while she shattered on the floor. She pushed herself up on trembling arms. Her reflection in the mirror was a stranger. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, hair falling loose from its pins. The emerald dress wrinkled and twisted around her body. Her mother's earrings still hung from her ears, catching the weak morning light. She reached up and unfastened them, one at a time, and set them on the counter. Then she stripped off the dress, left it in a heap on the floor, and walked naked to the shower. She turned the water as hot as it would go and stood under the scalding stream until her skin turned red, until she couldn't tell the difference between water and tears. When she finally stepped out, her phone was ringing. Not the burner. She'd destroyed that. Her regular phone sitting on the bedroom nightstand where she'd left it a lifetime ago. She wrapped herself in a towel and walked to answer it. Unknown number. Hello? Selene Voss? A woman's voice, clipped and professional. Yes? This is Agent Rebecca Chen, FBI Financial Crimes Division. I need you to come in for questioning regarding Adrian Mercer and Mercer Global Holdings. Selene's stomach dropped. When? This morning, 9 o'clock, Federal Plaza, downtown Manhattan. Do you need the address? I know where it is. Good. Don't be late, Mrs. Mercer, and I'd recommend bringing a lawyer. The line went dead. Selene stood holding the phone, water dripping from her hair onto the hardwood. Her mind felt sluggish, like moving through mud. The FBI. They wanted to question her, which meant Adrian's lawyers had already started their narrative. The unstable wife, the paranoid accusations, the woman who needed to be managed. She looked at the clock. 7:15. She had less than 2 hours. She dressed in black trousers and a white blouse, pulled her hair into a severe bun, no makeup except concealer to hide the shadows under her eyes. She looked like someone going to a funeral. Maybe she was. At 8:30, she called a car service and rode downtown in silence. The driver tried to make conversation but gave up when Selene didn't respond. She stared out the window, watching Manhattan wake up. People rushing to work, coffee carts on corners, steam rising from subway grates. Federal Plaza was a concrete fortress, all sharp angles and security checkpoints. Selene showed her ID, passed through metal detectors, and was escorted to the third floor by a young agent who wouldn't meet her eyes. Agent Chen was waiting in an interview room. Late 30s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a gray suit that looked slept in. She gestured to the chair across from her. Mrs. Mercer, thank you for coming. Selene sat. Do I need a lawyer? That depends on what you have to tell me. I don't understand. Agent Chen opened a folder and slid a photograph across the table. It showed Selene and Lucien entering the gala together, her hand on his arm. You attended the Blackthorn Foundation gala last night as the guest of Lucien Vale. Not your husband. Care to explain? Selene's throat tightened. Is that illegal? No. But it's interesting timing. The same night your husband's company gets exposed for massive fraud, you show up with a man known for destroying powerful people. Agent Chen leaned forward. So I'm going to ask you directly, Mrs. Mercer. Did you work with Lucien Vale to orchestrate this? No. No? I tried to, but it didn't work. Agent Chen's expression didn't change. Explain. So Selene did. She told Agent Chen about the receipt, the offshore accounts, the meetings with Lucien, the 3 weeks of gathering evidence. She told her about Ivy Laurent and the confrontation in the bathroom, about Adrian moving the money hours before the gala, about the folder of documents showing Lucien's payments from Adrian's attorneys. By the time she finished, her throat was raw. Agent Chen sat back, her face unreadable. Do you have proof of any of this? I had a burner phone. I destroyed it last night. Convenient. I was angry. I thought... Selene's voice broke. I thought Lucien had betrayed me, that he'd been working for Adrian all along. And now? Now I don't know what to think. Agent Chen pulled out another photograph. This one showed Lucien meeting with a man Selene didn't recognize in what looked like a parking garage. That's Marcus Webb, Agent Chen said. Adrian Mercer's head of legal. This photo was taken 3 weeks ago. She slid over another image. This is from 6 months ago. Same 2 men, different location. Selene's hands clenched in her lap. So it's true. Lucien was working for Adrian. Actually, no. Agent Chen's expression shifted slightly. Marcus Webb was working for us. He's been an informant for 8 months, feeding us information about Mercer Global's activities. Lucien Vale was his contact. The room tilted. What? Lucian Vale is a lot of things, Mrs. Mercer, but he's not stupid enough to double-cross both sides of a federal investigation. The documents you saw in that folder? Fabricated. Adrian's lawyers created them to make you think Lucian had betrayed you. Selene couldn't breathe. Why? Because Adrian knew you'd go to Lucian for help. He knew you'd build a case together, so he planted evidence to destroy your trust in the one person who could actually help you. Agent Chen leaned forward. Adrian Mercer is very good at manipulating people, Mrs. Mercer. Especially you. The money, Selene whispered. Adrian moved it. He said he knew about everything because someone inside Lucian's organization was feeding him information. He lied. Adrian moved the money because Marcus Webb tipped him off, deliberately. We needed Adrian to think he was getting away with it. We needed him to move that money so we could track it. Selene's vision swam. You used me. No, you were already in motion. We just didn't stop you. Agent Chen's voice softened slightly. Look, Mrs. Mercer, I'm going to be honest. Your husband is currently on his way to the Cayman Islands on a private jet. He thinks he's won. He thinks he's moved his money somewhere we can't reach it. But every dollar he transferred yesterday is being tracked by 3 separate agencies. And when that plane lands in 3 hours, he's going to be arrested by federal agents and extradited back to New York to stand trial. Selene's hand started shaking, so it worked. Everything we did is going to put Adrian Mercer in prison for the rest of his life. Yes. Agent Chen closed her folder. But I need something from you first. What? Testimony, on record, about everything Adrian told you last night, the confession about moving the money, his claims about Lucian working for him, his threats about leaving you with nothing. Agent Chen's eyes were hard. I need you to destroy him in court the same way he tried to destroy you. Selene sat frozen. Part of her wanted to refuse, to walk away and let the FBI handle it without dragging her further into the wreckage. But another part, the part that had spent 3 weeks pretending to be someone she wasn't, the part that had stood on that bathroom floor and broken completely, that part wanted to watch Adrian realize he'd lost. All right, she said, I'll testify. Agent Chen nodded. Good. We'll need you to come back tomorrow with a lawyer to give your official statement. In the meantime, don't contact Adrian. Don't contact Lucian. Don't talk to anyone about this conversation. Can I ask you something? Maybe. Ivy Laurent, where is she really? Agent Chen's expression went carefully neutral. Miss Laurent is currently in protective custody. She's agreed to testify against Adrian in exchange for immunity. The story about Argentina was part of Adrian's misdirection. So everything he told me last night was a lie. Not everything. He really was planning to divorce you. He really did move assets into trusts you can't access. And he really does think you're weak. Agent Chen stood. But he's wrong about that last part. Anyone who can survive what you've survived isn't weak, Mrs. Mercer. They're dangerous. The interview ended. Selene walked out of Federal Plaza into cold November sunlight feeling like she'd been turned inside out. Her phone buzzed immediately. 15 missed calls. 10 from unknown numbers, probably reporters. 3 from her lawyer, 2 from numbers she didn't recognize, and 1 from Lucian Vale. She stared at his name on the screen, her thumb hovering over the call button. Agent Chen had told her not to contact him, but she needed to know if he'd really been on her side, if the trust she'd built over 3 weeks had been real or just another manipulation. She hit the call button. He answered on the first ring. Selene, did you betray me? No. His voice was rough, like he hadn't slept. The documents Adrian showed you were forgeries. I've never worked for him. I've been trying to reach you since last night. I destroyed the burner phone. I know. I tried your regular number, but it went to voicemail. A pause. Where are you? I just left the FBI. Silence on the other end. Then, what did you tell them? Everything. More silence. Selene could hear Lucian breathing, could almost see him processing the implications. Good, he said finally. That's good. They need your testimony. You knew about the FBI tracking the money. About Marcus Webb. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because if you'd known, you would have acted differently. Adrian would have sensed it. The whole operation would have collapsed. Lucian's voice was carefully controlled. I'm sorry, Selene. I wanted to tell you, But some things require lying to the people you're trying to protect. Don't. The word came out sharp. Don't you dare make this about protection. You used me. I gave you what you wanted. Adrian's going to prison. Isn't that enough? No. Selene's voice cracked. It's not enough. Because I spent last night thinking you'd betrayed me. I spent hours believing that everything we'd built together was a lie. Do you understand what that did to me? Yes. Lucian's voice went quiet. Because I've spent the past 12 hours thinking you hated me for something I didn't do. So yes, Selene, I understand. She closed her eyes, leaning against a concrete pillar outside the federal building. Around her, the city moved, people rushing past, taxis honking, the constant hum of life continuing while hers fell apart. Agent Chen said Adrian's plane lands in 3 hours, she said. I know. I want to be there when they arrest him. Selene, I want to watch his face when he realizes he didn't win. I want to see him understand that I destroyed him after all. Her voice was steel now. Can you make that happen? Lucian was quiet for a moment. Yes, but it's not going to be what you think. I don't care. All right, I'll text you the address. Be there at noon. He hung up. Selene stood in the cold morning air, her phone pressed against her ear even after the line went dead. Something had shifted inside her in the past 24 hours. The woman who'd woken on that bathroom floor wasn't the same woman who'd walked into Federal Plaza. That woman had been broken. This one had learned how to be dangerous. The text came through 10 minutes later. An address in New Jersey, Teterboro Airport, private terminal. Selene called another car service. Ma chat. The airport was smaller than she expected. Just a handful of buildings and runways for private jets. The driver dropped her at the main entrance, and she found Lucien waiting outside, hands in the pockets of his black coat, his pale eyes tracking her as she approached. You didn't have to come, he said. Yes, I did. He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. The FBI's inside. Agent Chen cleared you to observe, but you can't interfere. You understand? I'm not going to interfere. I just want to watch. Lucien led her through security and into a small observation room overlooking the tarmac. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed 3 empty runways and a gray November sky. Agent Chen stood near the glass with 4 other agents, all wearing windbreakers with FBI emblazoned across the back. Chen glanced at Selene, her expression neutral. Mrs. Mercer, glad you could make it. When does his plane land? 12 minutes. Chen pointed to a screen showing radar tracking. That's him. Flight plan says Cayman Islands, but we're rerouting him here. His pilot thinks it's mechanical trouble. Selene moved to the window and pressed her palm against the cold glass. Somewhere up there, Adrian was sitting in a leather seat drinking champagne, probably calling his lawyers, already planning his next move. He thought he'd escaped. He thought he'd won. What happens when he lands? Selene asked. We board the plane before he can disembark. Read him his rights. Arrest him on charges of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. Chen's voice was matter of fact. Then we put him in a car and drive him to Manhattan to be arraigned. And Ivy? She's already cooperating. By the time Adrian's lawyer gets him out on bail, if they can, she'll have given us everything we need to lock him up for 20 years. The minutes crawled past. Selene stood at the window, Lucien beside her, neither of them speaking. She could feel the tension radiating off him, could see his reflection in the glass, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the sky. You really didn't know, she said quietly, about the fake documents. Not until this morning, when Agent Chen called me. Lucian's voice was low. Adrian's lawyers are good. They knew exactly how to make it look real. I'm sorry for not trusting you. You had every reason not to. I kept things from you, to protect the investigation, and to protect you. Lucien turned to look at her. If Adrian had known you were aware of the FBI's involvement, he would have killed you, Selene. Not metaphorically, literally. Men like him don't accept defeat. They eliminate threats. Selene's throat tightened. He kissed me the night before the gala. I know. How? Because men like Adrian always make one last play for control, one last attempt to own what they're about to lose. Lucienne's pale eyes held hers. Did it work? Almost. Selene looked back out the window. For about 5 seconds, I believed he meant it, that maybe we could fix everything. And then? Then I remembered Ivy's name on that receipt, and I remembered why I was doing this. A voice crackled over the radio. Target approaching, ETA 2 minutes. Everyone in the room tensed. Chen moved closer to the window, hand on her radio. The other agents checked their weapons, their movements practiced and efficient. Selene's heart hammered against her ribs. Then she saw it. A small white jet appearing through the clouds, descending toward the runway. It touched down smoothly, tires squealing against asphalt, and taxied toward the terminal. That's him, Chen said into her radio. All units move in. The plane stopped 50 yards from the window. The engines powered down. Black SUVs appeared from behind the terminal, surrounding the aircraft. Agents and FBI windbreakers swarmed out, weapons drawn, forming a perimeter. The plane's door opened. Stairs unfolded, and Adrian Mercer stepped out into the cold November air. Even from this distance, Selene could see his confusion. He looked around at the agents, the vehicles, the weapons pointed at him. His expression shifted from confusion to understanding to rage in the span of 3 seconds. An agent approached him, badge out, mouth moving. Adrian's hands went up slowly. He said something back. Selene couldn't hear it, but she could read his body language. Defiant, angry, still believing he could talk his way out. Then they put him in handcuffs. Selene watched as they led him toward one of the SUVs. He moved stiffly, his expensive suit rumpled, his hair no longer perfectly combed. He looked smaller than she remembered, less powerful, human. And then, just before they put him in the vehicle, Adrian turned and looked directly at the observation window. Selene knew he couldn't see her through the tinted glass, but his eyes found hers anyway, like he could feel her watching. For 3 seconds, they stared at each other across 50 yards of tarmac and broken trust. Adrian's expression changed. The rage drained away, replaced by something Selene had never seen on his face before. Fear. Then they pushed him into the SUV and slammed the door. Selene exhaled, her breath fogging the glass. Her legs felt weak. She grabbed the window frame to steady herself. It's over, Lucien said quietly. No. Selene's voice was hoarse. It's not over until he's convicted. He will be. Ivy's testimony alone is enough. And with what you're going to tell the court, I want more. Lucien looked at her sharply. What do you mean? I mean, I want him to lose everything. Not just his freedom, everything. Selene turned to face him, and whatever he saw in her eyes made him take a step back. His reputation, his legacy, his name. I want Adrian Mercer to become a cautionary tale, a punchline, a warning about what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. Selene, can you help me do that? Lucien studied her for a long moment, then slowly, carefully, he nodded. Yes, but it's going to cost you. I don't care. You will. When you see what it takes to destroy someone completely. I already know what it takes. Selene's voice was cold, flat. It takes being willing to burn down everything, including yourself, to make sure they burn hotter. Agent Chen approached them, her radio crackling. Mrs. Mercer, we're going to need you to come to the field office this afternoon. We've moved up your statement to today. Why? Because Adrian's lawyer just filed for an emergency bail hearing. We need your testimony on record before he can spin this as a misunderstanding. Chen's expression was grim. His legal team is already claiming he was framed by his wife and her accomplice. They're going to try to make you the villain here. Selene felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. Then let's give them what they want. Excuse me? Let them make me the villain. Let them tell everyone I manipulated and deceived my poor husband. Because when I get on that stand and tell the jury exactly what Adrian Mercer said to me, exactly how he bragged about stealing from his investors, exactly how he described moving $400 million to avoid prosecution. Selene's voice was steel now. It's going to sound a lot worse coming from the villain they created. Chen's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. I like the way you think, Mrs. Mercer. When do I testify? Preliminary hearing is set for Monday. 3 days. Can you be ready? Selene thought about the past 3 weeks. The lies she'd told, the fear she'd swallowed, the night she'd broken on the bathroom floor. Yes, she said. I can be ready. The weekend passed in a blur of lawyers and preparation. Selene's attorney was a woman named Margaret Torres, 55, iron gray hair, a reputation for eviscerating hostile witnesses on cross-examination. She'd been recommended by Lucian, and within 30 minutes of their first meeting, Selene understood why. Your husband's lawyers are going to try to paint you as unstable, Margaret said, sitting across from Selene in her Upper East Side office. They're going to bring up the confrontation with Ivy Laurent. They're going to question why you went to Lucian's bail instead of coming forward to authorities. They're going to suggest you fabricated evidence out of jealousy. Let them, Selene said. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? Let them make those arguments, because every time they question my motives, it reminds the jury why I was investigating in the first place. My husband was committing fraud. He was stealing from his investors, and I caught him. They're going to argue you're lying, that Adrian's confession to you was coerced or taken out of context. I'm not lying, and neither is Ivy Laurent, or the FBI agents who tracked the money, or the forensic accountants who traced the shell companies. Selene leaned forward. Adrian Mercer is going to prison, Margaret. The only question is whether I walk away from this with my dignity intact or destroyed. And I've already lost too much to let him take that too. Margaret studied her for a long moment. Then she smiled, a sharp, predatory thing. Good. Because Adrian's lawyer is Thomas Caldwell, and that man doesn't play fair. He's going to come at you hard. Personal attacks, psychological warfare, anything to make the jury doubt your credibility. I've been married to Adrian Mercer for 23 years. I know exactly what psychological warfare looks like. Then you'll do fine. Sunday night, Selene lay in her hotel room. She'd left the mansion the morning after Adrian's arrest, unable to sleep in a place that still smelled like him, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would walk into a courtroom and face her husband for the first time since his arrest. Tomorrow she would have to look him in the eye and speak the words that would destroy him. Her phone buzzed. A text from Lucian. You ready? She typed back, no, but I'm going anyway. Good. Because tomorrow the whole world is watching. Don't give them a victim. Give them someone who fought back and won. Selene set down her phone and closed her eyes. She thought about her mother, who'd survived her own husband's betrayal by learning to follow the money. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 weeks ago, pouring Adrian's coffee and smiling at his jokes. She thought about the receipt with Ivy's name and the moment everything had shattered. And she thought about the woman she'd become. Someone who'd learned that surviving wasn't enough. You had to burn down the old world to make space for the new one. Monday morning arrived with brutal clarity. Selene dressed in a navy suit and white silk blouse, her hair pulled back, minimal makeup, her mother's diamond earrings the only jewelry. She looked professional, composed, untouchable, exactly what the jury needed to see. The courthouse was surrounded by reporters and cameras. Selene's lawyer had arranged a side entrance, but even that was mobbed. Flashes exploded as she climbed the steps. Questions shouted from a dozen directions. Mrs. Mercer, did you know about your husband's fraud? Mrs. Mercer, are you divorcing Adrian? Mrs. Mercer, how does it feel to betray your husband? She kept walking, Margaret at her side, until they were through security and into the relative quiet of the courthouse halls. Ignore them, Margaret said. Focus on your testimony. They entered the courtroom through a side door. It was smaller than Selene expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, rows of benches for observers. The judge's bench sat elevated at the front. Prosecutor's table on the left. Defense table on the right. And sitting at that defense table, flanked by 3 lawyers in expensive suits, was Adrian Mercer. He'd lost weight. His suit hung looser on his frame. His hair wasn't perfectly combed. But when he looked up and saw Selene enter, his eyes were the same, just sharp, calculating, predatory. He smiled. It was the coldest thing Selene had ever seen. She took her seat in the front row behind the prosecutor's table, her hands folded in her lap, and forced herself to breathe. The bailiff called the room to order. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Hammond. Everyone stood. The judge entered. A woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd heard every excuse in the book. and believed none of them. Please be seated. Judge Hammond settled into her chair and opened a folder. We're here for the preliminary hearing in the matter of United States versus Adrian James Mercer. Charges include wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Prosecution, are you ready to present? Yes, Your Honor, said the prosecutor, a lean black man in his 40s named David Chen, no relation to the FBI agent. The United States calls Selene Voss to the stand. Selene stood. Her legs felt disconnected from her body. She walked to the witness stand, raised her right hand, and swore to tell the truth. David Chen approached with a gentle smile. Mrs. Voss, thank you for being here today. Mrs. Mercer, Adrian's lawyer interrupted, standing. The witness is still legally married to my client. Her name is Mrs. Mercer. Judge Hammond looked at Selene. How would you like to be addressed? Selene met Adrian's gaze across the courtroom. Voss, my maiden name. I'm filing for divorce. Adrian's jaw tightened. Mrs. Voss it is, the judge said. Continue, Mr. Chen. Mrs. Voss, how long were you married to the defendant? 23 years. And during that time, were you aware of your husband's business activities? Some. He managed the company. I managed our home. Did there come a time when you began to suspect your husband of illegal activity? Selene took a breath. Yes. 6 weeks ago, I found a receipt in his coat pocket. It was for champagne, expensive champagne, signed by him and another woman. And what did you do? I started looking through our finances, our accounts, his business records. Selene's voice was steady now. That's when I discovered the offshore accounts, the shell companies, money being moved to places I couldn't trace. What did you do with that information? I tried to confront him about it, but he dismissed me, told me I didn't understand business. Selene glanced at Adrian. He was watching her with that same cold smile. So I went to someone who could help me. Lucien Vale. Yes. And what did Mr. Vale tell you? That my husband had been stealing from his investors for 3 years. That he'd moved over $300 million through fraudulent accounts. And that he was planning to divorce me after publicly humiliating me at a charity gala. Adrian's lawyer stood. Objection. Hearsay. We have no evidence Mr. Vale said any of this. I'll allow it, Judge Hammond said. This is a preliminary hearing. Continue, Mr. Chen. Mrs. Voss, did you confront your husband about these allegations? Yes, the night of the gala, after he was exposed. And what did he say? Selene's hands gripped the armrests of the witness chair. This was it. The moment everything would either come together or fall apart. He told me he'd known I was investigating him for weeks, that he'd been watching me, that he'd moved the money that afternoon to keep it away from federal investigators. Selene's voice didn't waver. He told me he'd been stealing from his investors for years, and that I was too stupid to prove it. He told me his lawyers would make sure I left the marriage with nothing. The courtroom was silent. He bragged about it, Selene continued, her eyes locked on Adrian's. He stood in our bedroom and described exactly how he'd manipulated his investors, how he'd hidden the losses, how he'd transferred the money through offshore accounts. And then he told me I should have stayed in my lane, that I wasn't strong enough to fight him. Adrian's face had gone pale. And how did that make you feel, Mrs. Voss? David Chen asked gently. Selene allowed herself a small, cold smile. Like I'd already won. The words hung in the air like a blade. Adrian's lawyer was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, this testimony is clearly fabricated. Mrs. Mercer, Mrs. Voss, has every reason to lie about my client. She's angry about the affair. She's vindictive. She wants... Mr. Caldwell, Judge Hammond interrupted, you'll have your chance to cross-examine. Sit down. But Selene was already standing, her hands steady on the witness stand rail, her voice cutting through the courtroom like ice. I'm not lying, she said, and I'm not vindictive. I'm just a woman who finally stopped letting her husband tell her who she was supposed to be. She looked directly at Adrian. You thought I was weak. You thought I'd take your settlement and disappear, but you were wrong. And now everyone knows it. Adrian stood, his chair scraping back, his face twisted with rage. You bit Mr. Mercer. Judge Hammond's gavel came down hard. Sit down, now. Adrian's lawyers grabbed his arms, pulling him back into his seat, but the damage was done. The jury even though this was just a preliminary hearing, had seen him lose control, had seen the mask slip. Judge Hammond leaned forward. Mrs. Voss, you may step down. We'll continue this tomorrow. Mr. Caldwell, control your client or I'll hold him in contempt. Selene walked back to her seat, her legs shaking but her spine straight. She didn't look at Adrian, didn't need to. She could feel his rage from across the room, hot and impotent. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed. Margaret guided Selene through them without stopping. But one question cut through the noise, shouted from the back of the crowd, Mrs. Voss, do you regret destroying your husband? Selene stopped, turned, found the reporter in the crowd, a young woman with a notepad and hungry eyes. No, Selene said clearly. I regret not doing it sooner. Then she walked away, leaving Adrian Mercer's empire burning behind her. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Every morning, Selene woke in her hotel room overlooking Central Park and dressed in the same careful uniform, tailored suits in navy or charcoal, white blouses, minimal jewelry except for her mother's diamond earrings. Every morning, she walked through the gauntlet of reporters and cameras outside the courthouse. Every morning, she took her seat in the gallery and watched her husband's empire dismantle itself piece by piece. Adrian's lawyers fought hard. They brought character witnesses who testified about his philanthropy, his generosity, his commitment to his clients. They presented expert witnesses who claimed the offshore accounts were legitimate tax structures, that the shell companies were standard business practice, that everything could be explained away as aggressive but legal financial maneuvering. But then the prosecution called Ivy Laurent. Ivy walked into the courtroom wearing a gray suit that made her look younger than her 28 years, her blonde hair pulled back, no makeup except mascara that couldn't hide the circles under her eyes. She'd spent 3 weeks in protective custody, and it showed. She looked like someone who'd survived a car crash, functional but damaged. When she took the stand and the prosecutor asked her to describe her relationship with Adrian Mercer, she didn't hesitate. He told me he loved me, Ivy said, her voice flat. He told me his marriage was over, that his wife didn't understand him, that once the divorce was final, we'd start a life together. She paused, her hands folded in her lap. Then he asked me to sign documents, financial transfers, offshore accounts. He said it was restructuring, that I was helping him protect his assets during the divorce. Did you know what you were signing? The prosecutor asked. No, not at first. Ivy's voice cracked. But after Mrs. Mercer confronted me at that dinner, I started looking closer, and I realized what we'd been doing, what he'd been using me to do, which was stealing from his own investors, moving their money into accounts he controlled, hiding losses behind fake returns. Ivy looked directly at Adrian for the first time. He made me his accomplice. And when I realized what was happening, when I tried to walk away, he told me if I said anything, he'd make sure I went to prison instead of him. Adrian's face was stone, but Selene saw his hands clench on the defense table, saw the muscle working in his jaw. The prosecutor walked Ivy through 3 years of documents, each one signed with her name but authorized by Adrian. Wire transfers, fake investment reports, emails discussing how to hide the fraud from auditors. By the time Ivy stepped down from the stand, she was crying. But Adrian's lawyer, Thomas Caldwell, wasn't done. During cross-examination, he went after Ivy like a predator sensing blood. Miss Laurent, isn't it true that you pursued Mr. Mercer? That you initiated the affair? We both, yes or no, Miss Laurent? Did you pursue him? Yes, but, and isn't it true that you're testifying today because the FBI offered you immunity? That without this deal, you'd be facing 20 years in federal prison? Ivy's face flushed. Yes. So you have every reason to lie, to blame my client for crimes you committed in order to save yourself. I'm not lying. You signed those documents, didn't you? Your signature, your authorization. You moved that money. You created those shell companies. And now you're claiming you were manipulated? Caldwell's voice dripped with contempt. Or is the truth that you're a scorned mistress trying to destroy a man who didn't leave his wife for you? The prosecutor objected. The judge sustained it. But the damage was done. The jury had seen Ivy break, had seen her motive questioned, had seen a woman who might be lying to save her own skin. Selene watched it all from the gallery, her hands clenched in her lap. She knew what Caldwell was doing. Creating reasonable doubt, planting the seed that maybe Adrian was the victim here, manipulated by a younger woman and a vengeful wife. After Ivy's testimony, the prosecution called forensic accountants who traced every dollar Adrian had moved. They called FBI agents who described finding empty accounts in Zurich. They called investors who'd lost their life savings. One man, 73 years old, with trembling hands, described how Adrian Mercer had personally assured him his retirement fund was safe 3 weeks before it disappeared. But Adrian's defense team countered with their own experts, their own witnesses, their own narrative. By the time the prosecution rested, the case felt less like a certainty and more like a coin flip. Then it was Celine's turn to testify again. She'd already given her preliminary testimony, but now, in front of a jury, with 6 weeks of evidence behind them, the prosecutor needed her to seal the case. David Chen approached the stand with the careful steps of someone walking through a minefield. Mrs. Voss, you testified earlier about a conversation with your husband the night of the gala. I'd like you to walk the jury through that conversation again, in detail. Selene took a breath. She'd practiced this with her lawyer a dozen times. But sitting here under the fluorescent lights, with Adrian 10 feet away and 12 jurors watching her every expression, it felt different, raw. Adrian came home around midnight, she began. I was waiting for him. I'd seen what happened at the gala, heard about the investigation. I thought, her voice caught, I thought maybe he'd want to explain, or apologize, or something. What happened instead? He sat on the edge of our bed and drank scotch, and then he asked me if I really thought he wouldn't know I was planning something. Selene's hands gripped the armrest. He told me he'd been watching me for weeks, that he knew I'd gone to Lucian Vale, that he'd moved the money that afternoon specifically because he knew I was coming for him. He admitted to moving the money? Yes. He said... Selene closed her eyes, remembering Adrian's face in that moment, the cold satisfaction in his voice. He said, You think I built an empire by being careless? I started preparing the moment I suspected you'd gone to Lucian Vale, moving assets, creating exit strategies, making sure that when you tried to destroy me, I'd have the resources to survive. The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of the court reporter's keys. Did he say anything else about the money? He told me he'd been running what he called aggressive financial restructuring for 3 years. He said everyone does it, that it was just moving money around, managing risk. But then, Selene opened her eyes and looked directly at the jury. Then he told me I should have stayed in my lane, that I wasn't strong enough to fight him, that his lawyers would make sure I left the marriage with nothing. How did you respond? I asked him about Ivy, about the affair. Selene's voice steadied. He said she understood what I never did, that power requires sacrifice, that success has a price. He said she was hungry and ambitious and didn't look at him like he was a monster for wanting more. David Chen let that hang in the air for a moment. Then, Mrs. Voss, why are you testifying today? Because my husband committed fraud, because he stole from people who trusted him, because he used his mistress as a shield and his wife as camouflage. Selene's voice was quiet but clear, and because for 23 years, I made myself small so he could feel large. I'm not doing that anymore. Chen nodded and sat down. Then Thomas Caldwell stood up for cross-examination. He walked toward the witness stand slowly, a predator sizing up prey. When he spoke, his voice was gentle, almost kind. Mrs. Voss, you loved your husband once, didn't you? Selene's chest tightened. Yes. And finding out about the affair hurt you, made you angry. Yes. Angry enough to want revenge? I wanted justice. Justice or revenge, Mrs. Voss? Because from where I'm sitting, they look very similar. Caldwell smiled. You discovered your husband was having an affair. You were humiliated, devastated. So you went to Lucian Vale, a man known for destroying powerful people, and you asked him to help you destroy your husband. That's not... And when Mr. Vale told you about these alleged financial crimes, you didn't go to the authorities. You didn't call the FBI. You spent 3 weeks gathering information, planning your attack, preparing to humiliate your husband at the most public event of the year. Caldwell's voice hardened. That's not justice, Mrs. Voss. That's revenge. I went to the FBI after you'd already destroyed his reputation, after you'd already made him a headline. Caldwell leaned against the witness stand. Isn't it possible, Mrs. Voss, that you misunderstood what your husband told you that night? That you were emotional, upset, looking for confirmation of what you wanted to believe? No. Isn't it possible that Adrian Mercer, a man who built a successful company over 25 years, who employed hundreds of people, who donated millions to charity, who by all accounts was a dedicated businessman, isn't it possible that he's being destroyed by a woman scorned and a mistress trying to save herself? Selene met Caldwell's eyes. She thought about Adrian's smile in that bedroom. She thought about Ivy's name on the receipt. She thought about the investors who'd lost everything, and the man with trembling hands who'd trusted Adrian with his retirement. No, she said clearly, it's not possible, because I know what my husband told me, and I know what I found, and I know that for 23 years I believed everything he said. I believed he was good. I believed he was honest. I believed he loved me. Her voice didn't waver. I'm not making that mistake again. Caldwell stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, a thin, defeated thing. No further questions. Selene stepped down from the stand. Her legs shook, but she made it back to her seat without stumbling. Lucien sat in the row behind her, and as she passed, his hand briefly touched her shoulder. Steady. Grounding. The trial continued for another week. Closing arguments were delivered. The jury deliberated for 3 days, and on a cold Tuesday morning in December, they returned with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Adrian's face went blank when the foreman read the decision. Not angry, not devastated, just empty. Like someone had reached inside him and removed everything that mattered. His lawyers immediately requested bail pending sentencing, but Judge Hammond denied it. Mr. Mercer has access to significant financial resources and has already demonstrated a willingness to flee prosecution, she said. He will remain in federal custody until sentencing. U.S. Marshals approached the defense table. Adrian stood, his movements mechanical, and held out his hands for the cuffs. As they led him past the gallery toward the door, he looked at Selene one last time. There was no rage in his eyes now. No calculation, just the blank stare of a man who'd finally run out of moves. Then he was gone. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the doors. Investors wept and hugged each other. Adrian's lawyers gathered their papers in grim silence. Selene sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, and tried to feel something. Victory, relief, satisfaction, anything. But all she felt was tired. Outside the courthouse, the December wind cut through her coat like glass. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions, but Margaret Torres cleared a path to the waiting car. Lucien followed behind them, a silent shadow in black. They drove in silence back to Manhattan, through streets glittering with holiday lights and Christmas decorations. The city looked the same as it always had, people rushing, living, surviving, as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed. The car stopped at Selene's hotel. She started to get out, but Lucien touched her arm. Wait, he said. She looked at him. He'd been there through all of it, the planning, the betrayal, the trial. But they'd barely spoken outside of strategy sessions and court appearances. The weeks had built a wall between them made of exhaustion and trauma and things left unsaid. I'm leaving New York, Lucien said quietly. Tomorrow. There's work in London. Things that need my attention. Selene's chest tightened. How long? 6 months. Maybe longer. His pale eyes searched her face. But I wanted you to know that if you need anything at all, you call me. It doesn't matter where I am or what I'm doing. You call, and I come. Why? Because what we did together, Lucien's voice was rough. It changed me. Watching you survive what you survived, watching you refuse to break even when breaking would have been easier. I've worked with a lot of people, Selene, powerful people, dangerous people, but I've never met anyone like you. Selene felt something crack in her chest. I didn't survive. I'm barely holding together. That's surviving. That's what it looks like. Lucien's hand covered hers on the seat between them. You're going to be okay. You're going to rebuild. And someday, you're going to wake up and realize you're not just surviving anymore. You're living. And what about you? I'll figure it out. I always do. He squeezed her hand once, then let go. Go inside, get some sleep. Let yourself rest. Selene nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She climbed out of the car and walked into the hotel without looking back. Upstairs, in her room overlooking Central Park, She stood at the window and watched the city lights blur through tears she hadn't realized she was crying. Adrian Mercer was convicted. The trial was over. She'd won. So why did she feel like she'd lost everything? Anpranus. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. Judge Hammond gave Adrian Mercer 22 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for the first 10. The courtroom was packed. Investors, reporters, curiosity seekers who'd followed the trial like a soap opera. Selene sat in the front row, her lawyer beside her, and watched Adrian stand before the judge in an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his frame. "Mr. Mercer," Judge Hammond said, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom, "you stole from people who trusted you. You manipulated your employees, your investors, and your own wife to build an empire based on lies. You've shown no remorse, no understanding of the harm you've caused. 22 years is lenient compared to what you deserve, but it will ensure you never have the opportunity to do this again." Adrian said nothing. His face was blank, carved from stone. The marshals led him away. This time, Selene didn't watch. She kept her eyes on her hands, folded in her lap, and listened to his footsteps fade. Outside, reporters asked if she felt vindicated, if justice had been served, if she had any message for Adrian. "No," Selene said quietly. "I have nothing left to say to him." "What's next for you, Mrs. Voss?" Selene looked at the camera, at the reporter, at the city stretching out behind them. "I'm going to rebuild," she said. "That's all." Boom! The divorce finalized in March. Adrian's lawyers tried to fight it from prison, claiming Selene had no grounds, that the prenuptial agreement protected his assets. But with Adrian convicted and his finances under federal control, the argument fell apart. The judge awarded Selene $3 million from what remained of Adrian's legitimate holdings, enough to start over, but nowhere near what she would have gotten if Adrian hadn't hidden everything else. Selene didn't care. She signed the papers, took back her maiden name legally, and walked out of the courthouse a free woman. That night, she stood in her new apartment, a modest 2-bedroom on the Upper East Side, nothing like the mansion on Ashford Lane, but hers completely, and opened a bottle of wine. She poured herself a glass and sat by the window, watching the city glow beneath her. Her phone buzzed. A text from an international number. "I heard about the divorce. Congratulations." L. Selene smiled. The first real smile in months. "Thank you." "How's London?" "Rainy. Cold. Exactly what I needed. When are you coming back?" The response took a while. When it came, it was shorter than she expected. "When you're ready." Selene stared at those 3 words for a long time. Then she set down her phone and returned to the window. She wasn't ready. Not yet. She had to learn how to be herself again first. The woman she'd been before Adrian, before the mansion, before 23 years of making herself small. But someday she would be. Akshit. Ivy Laurent disappeared after the trial. The immunity deal meant she didn't serve prison time, but her career in finance was over. The last Selene heard, Ivy had moved to Seattle and was working at a nonprofit under a different name. Part of Selene wanted to hate her, the woman who'd helped Adrian steal, who'd signed the documents, who'd slept with her husband. But mostly Selene just felt sorry for her. Ivy had been 25 when Adrian found her, young and ambitious and hungry for validation. She'd believed his lies the same way Selene had, and now she was living in exile, rebuilding from nothing. They weren't so different in the end. One afternoon in late spring, Selene received a letter forwarded through her lawyer. No return address, just her name on the envelope in handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside was a single page. "Mrs. Voss, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry for the affair, for the documents I signed, for believing Adrian when he told me you didn't matter. You were the strongest person in that courtroom. I hope someday I can be half as brave as you were. I.L." Selene read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe someday. Man, summer arrived hot and bright. Selene spent her days rebuilding in small ways, joining a book club, taking a photography class, learning how to cook something other than dinner party food. She made friends slowly, people who knew nothing about Adrian Mercer or the trial or the woman she used to be. They just knew Selene Voss, the quiet woman who lived alone and always ordered the same coffee at the corner cafe. Some nights she woke up gasping, dreaming about Adrian's smile or the receipt with Ivy's name or the moment in the bathroom when she'd broken completely. But those nights grew further apart as the months passed, replaced by dreams about other things: travel, art, the sound of her own laughter. In August, her lawyer called with unexpected news. "There's been a development with Adrian's assets," Margaret said. "The federal receivers found additional accounts, legitimate ones from before the fraud. Money that was yours under the divorce settlement but got lost in the chaos." "How much?" $4 million. After taxes and legal fees, you're looking at close to $6 million total. Selene sat down hard on her couch. "What?" "Apparently Adrian set up a trust for you 20 years ago. Wedding gift. It's been sitting there accruing interest, and he forgot about it when he was hiding everything else." Margaret's voice held a note of irony. "He was so busy stealing that he forgot about the one legitimate thing he'd ever given you." The money arrived in her account 2 weeks later. Selene stared at the numbers on her banking app and felt nothing for a moment. Then she laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed in her empty apartment. Adrian had spent 23 years making her feel worthless, and in the end, he'd been the one to give her the means to start over. The universe had a sense of humor after all. Eat. Lucien came back to New York in October. He called the day he landed, his voice rough with jet lag and something else she couldn't identify. "I'm back," he said. "Can I see you?" They met at a coffee shop in Greenwich Village, neutral territory, somewhere neither of them had been before. Lucien looked different, tired, older maybe, with new lines around his eyes. But when he smiled at her across the table, it was genuine. "You look good," he said. "Liar." "No, you look like yourself, not the person you were pretending to be." He stirred sugar into his coffee. "How are you?" "Better. Some days." Selene wrapped her hands around her mug. "Still having nightmares, still flinching when men raise their voices, but better." "Therapy?" "Twice a week." She smiled slightly. "Turns out 23 years of emotional abuse doesn't disappear just because the abuser goes to prison." "No, but it gets easier." They talked for 2 hours, about his work in London, about her photography class, about everything except the trial and Adrian and the night Selene thought Lucien had betrayed her. Those topics hovered between them like ghosts, but neither reached for them. When they finally stood to leave, Lucien hesitated. "Can I take you to dinner sometime?" he asked. "Not business, not strategy, just dinner." Selene studied his face, the pale eyes, the careful expression, the man who'd helped her destroy her husband but never asked for anything in return. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to figure out who I am when I'm not fighting or surviving or pretending. I need to be okay alone before I can be okay with someone else." "How much time?" "I don't know. Months? Maybe a year? Maybe longer." Lucien nodded slowly. "I can wait." "Why?" "Because some things are worth waiting for." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "Take all the time you need, Selene. I'm not going anywhere." He left. Selene walked home through the October evening, leaves crunching under her feet, and felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Hope. Fuck. On the first anniversary of the gala, the night everything had burned, Selene took the train out to Ashford Lane. The mansion had been sold months ago to pay Adrian's legal fees and restitution. A tech CEO lived there now with his family. But Selene stood on the sidewalk outside the gates and looked at the windows glowing gold in the November darkness. She'd lived in that house for 23 years, walked those halls, slept in those bedrooms, made herself small in those rooms so Adrian could feel large. And now it belonged to someone else. Those rooms held different furniture, different memories, different lives. The woman who'd lived there, the one who'd poured Adrian's coffee and smiled at his jokes and wore the dresses he chose, that woman was gone. She'd died on a bathroom floor the night Selene learned the truth. But standing here now, Selene realized something she should have understood months ago. That woman had to die. Because the person Selene was becoming couldn't have existed alongside her. She took one last look at the mansion, Then she turned and walked back to the train station, heading home to the life she was building from the ashes. 2 years after the trial, Selene opened a small photography gallery in Soho. It was modest, just 3 rooms and a desk, white walls and good lighting, and her work hung in simple black frames. The photos were all of women, ordinary women going about their lives, a businesswoman on her lunch break, a mother walking her daughter to school, an elderly woman feeding pigeons in the park, women who'd survived things no one could see. The opening night was small, 20 people, mostly friends from her book club and photography class. Margaret Torres came and brought a bottle of champagne. A few art critics showed up out of curiosity, drawn by the story of the photographer more than the photographs themselves. And in the back, wearing black and holding a glass of wine, stood Lucien Vale. He'd kept his word. He'd waited. They'd had dinner 6 months ago, then again a month later, slowly building something that looked like trust. It wasn't romance. Not yet. Maybe it never would be. But it was real. Honest. Built on a foundation of 2 people who'd seen each other at their worst and chosen to stay anyway. Selene walked over to him, her heels clicking on the gallery floor. "What do you think?" she asked. Lucien studied the photograph nearest them. A woman standing at a window, her back to the camera, light falling across her shoulders like wings. "I think," he said slowly, "that you've learned how to see people the way you wanted to be seen. Not as decorations or possessions, but as survivors. That's what we are, isn't it? All of us. Just trying to survive." "No." Lucien looked at her, his pale eyes warm for once. "That's what you were. Now you're living. There's a difference." Selene felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe, or just the absence of war. "Yes," she said quietly. "There is." 5 years after Adrian's conviction, Selene received a letter from the prison. She almost threw it away without opening it. But curiosity won. She sat at her kitchen table in the apartment she'd lived in for 5 years. The one with the view of the park, the one that smelled like coffee and paint and her own life. And unfolded the single page. "Selene, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to care. But my lawyer said I could write one letter, and I wanted it to be to you. I've had 5 years to think about what happened, about what I did, about who I was. I was wrong. Not about the business. I still think I did what any smart businessman would do. But about you. I underestimated you, dismissed you, made you small because it made me feel large. I know you won't forgive me. I wouldn't forgive me either. But I wanted you to know that you were right. You were always stronger than I gave you credit for. I hope you're happy wherever you are, whatever you're doing. I hope you got the life I tried to take from you." Adrian Selene read the letter twice. Then she walked to her fireplace, lit a match, and watched Adrian's words turn to ash. She didn't need his apology, didn't need his admission of guilt or his recognition of her strength. She already knew who she was, and she'd built that knowledge from the wreckage of his empire, piece by piece, without his permission or his input. His words were smoke, and smoke always cleared eventually. 7 years after the gala, Selene Voss married Lucien Vale, but in a quiet ceremony at a courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Only 6 people attended. Margaret Torres, Agent Rebecca Chen, Celine's housekeeper from the old mansion, the one who'd helped her pack when she left, Lucien's sister, who'd flown in from London, and 2 friends from Celine's photography class who'd become family in the way chosen family does. Selene wore cream silk and her mother's diamond earrings. Lucien wore black, like always. The ceremony took 7 minutes. They signed papers, kissed, walked out into the October afternoon as husband and wife. That night they had dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the West Village. No photographers, no crowds, just 2 people who'd survived their own wars and decided to rebuild together. "Do you regret it?" Lucien asked over wine. "Everything that happened, the trial, the pain, all of it." Selene thought about the receipt tucked in Adrian's coat pocket, the bathroom floor, the moment she'd believed Lucien had betrayed her, the years of therapy and nightmares and slowly learning how to trust again. "No," she said finally, "because it led me here, to this, to you, to a life that's actually mine." even if it cost you everything you had before? Especially because of that. Selene reached across the table and took his hand. The woman I was before, she was a ghost, a performance. I had to burn her down to find out who I really was. And who are you? Selene smiled, still figuring that out, but I like her so far. They finished dinner and walked home through streets glittering with autumn leaves and streetlight. At their apartment, the one they'd bought together 6 months ago, the one that smelled like coffee and darkroom chemicals and two lives intertwining, they stood at the window overlooking the city. Below them, Manhattan glowed. 8 million people living and surviving and fighting their own battles. 8 million stories, each one a universe unto itself. Selene pressed her palm against the cold glass and thought about the woman she used to be. The one who'd poured Adrian's coffee and made herself small and believed that survival meant silence. That woman had found a receipt in her husband's coat and decided to burn down the world rather than accept defeat. And from those ashes, this woman, Selene Voss, photographer, survivor, wife on her own terms, had emerged. Not perfect, not unscathed, but whole. "What are you thinking?" Lucien asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Selene leaned back against him, watching the city lights blur through tired eyes. "That it's over," she said quietly. "That I finally, actually survived." "And what comes next?" Selene smiled. "Living, whatever that looks like." Lucien kissed her temple, and they stood together in the darkness, watching the city breathe below them. Somewhere out there, Adrian Mercer sat in a prison cell, counting the years until his parole hearing. Somewhere out there, Ivy Laurent was building a new life under a new name. Somewhere out there, all the players in this tragedy were living with their choices. But here, in this moment, Selene Voss was free. She'd paid the price for that freedom. 23 years of her life, a marriage dissolved, an empire burned, a woman destroyed and rebuilt from memory and scar tissue. But standing here now, warm and safe and loved by someone who saw her clearly and chose her anyway, Selene knew something she should have understood years ago. Some things were worth the cost, some battles were worth fighting, and some women were stronger than anyone, including themselves, ever imagined. Selene Voss was one of them. And her story wasn't about revenge or justice or destruction. It was about a woman who looked at the wreckage of her life and decided to build something better from the ruins. That was the real victory. Not what she'd destroyed, but what she'd become. 15 years after the night of the gala, on a cold October evening much like the one where everything began, an elderly woman sits in a coffee shop reading the newspaper. The headline announces the death of Adrian Mercer in prison at age 66. Heart attack, no family present. The woman reads the obituary once, carefully, noting that it mentions his business empire but not the fraud. His philanthropy, but not the theft. His marriage, but not his wife's name. She folds the newspaper, finishes her coffee, and walks out into the evening air. Her name is Selene Voss. She's 62 years old. She owns a successful photography gallery. She's been married to Lucien Vale for 8 years. She has friends and work and a life built entirely on her own terms. And when people ask her about the trial, about Adrian Mercer and the empire that burned, she says only this: "I survived. That's all that matters." Then she goes home to the life she built from ashes and fire, and the stubborn refusal to let someone else's cruelty define her story. Because in the end, that's what survival looks like. Not revenge, not victory, not even justice. Just one woman, still standing, still breathing, still choosing herself. Every single day.